The structure of Octopath Traveler presents a huge risk. By telling its story with 8 different characters and just as many plot lines, the RPG has inevitable peaks and valleys in its narrative flow. The spotlight shifts between revenge stories, rescue missions, and coming-of-age tales at a moment's notice. It's a lot to balance. So going into the game, I had high expectations for the writing. Not just the separate stories unfolding, but the presentation and dialogue tying them all together. The narrative glue, so to speak. Without this, Octopath might feel like a collection of short stories rather than the cohesive adventure of a multicultural group. Now, 60 hours into my playthrough and numerous chapters behind me, I'm shocked to find that narrative glue not in Octopath's writing, but in its combat. Right from the outset, Octopath Traveler's combat promises depth. No matter which of the 8 characters you start with, you soon discover 2 of the more impactful mechanics at play: boost points and enemy shields. The former are Octopath's offensive fuel. Every turn, each of your characters accrues 1 boost point. Saving these points allows your party to unleash extra physical attacks or amplified magical abilities.
Oh, flames!
Deciding when to unleash your boost points becomes a pillar of Octopath's combat and the fulcrum of your tactical decisions. This is due in large part to enemy shields. Each opponent has a number of armor layers, ranging anywhere from 1 to more than 10. In some cases, foes can increase their shield rating throughout the duration of the fight, making it increasingly difficult to penetrate their armor. By discovering an enemy's weaknesses to certain weapon types or elemental attacks, you can lower their shield rating with each successive strike. If you manage to deplete an enemy's shielding entirely, you break them for the remainder of this turn and the next, leaving them open to increased damage in the meantime. When combined with boost points, the act of breaking an enemy becomes the heart of your decision-making. Should you spend multiple points to stun that enemy with an upcoming turn? Or should you save boost for the next round when you can unleash it on an already defenseless foe? Weighing the benefits of HP damage versus shield depletion becomes critical throughout the game. If you've played many of this type of RPG before, Octopath's gameplay inspirations are probably fairly obvious. Stunning enemies is reminiscent of the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei games, while boost points harken back to Bravely Default and Bravely Second, a series that shares 2 producers with Octopath Traveler. But Octopath's combat is truly impressive because of its transparency. It doesn't hide much information at all, and it doesn't leave much of the fighting up to chance. Yes, you'll occasionally miss an attack because of your low accuracy or an opponent's high evasion, but outside of these scenarios, you'll rarely be surprised. You observe the next turn's attack order and make informed decisions based on your boost points, the enemy's shields, and the characters in your party. It's like playing a game of poker in which every player's hand is showing. Defeat is usually a result of carelessness or the enemy just having better cards. This isn't to say that there isn't variety and surprise to be found in Octopath's combat. In fact, they're abundant. There is a slew of variables at play: support abilities, job skills, and weapon effects, to name a few. You can swap secondary jobs right from the start menu, buffing each character's passive bonuses to prepare for the next boss fight. This isn't to mention each character's unique powers, such as H'aanit's beast taming or Alphen's knowledge of concoctions. There are also advanced jobs that further improve your travelers. You begin your quest as a scholar or a hunter or a merchant. But as the hours roll by and you face an ever-expanding roster of enemies, your characters evolve into walking arsenals. Your characters develop not just through the writing, but the combat as well. That right there is the major reason I grew to love Octopath Traveler's combat over the course of my playthrough. I have a tendency to look at games like individual parts: the writing, the soundtrack, the art direction. But Octopath Traveler, like my favorite games, finds ways to make those variables work in concert. It tells its story not just through dialogue and exposition, but through its gameplay as well. In other words, the traditional written aspects only tell half of the story. H'aanit is a hunter because the developers told us so, but also because she can bide her time in battles, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and deal massive amounts of damage. Alphen's plotline revolves around helping the sick, and his combat abilities reflect that. He removes party ailments, he erases status effects, and sometimes, in the right circumstances, against the right enemies, he weaponizes the very diseases he usually works to remove. After all, he who cureth can maketh ill. Story elements like these are littered throughout Octopath's combat. We learn Cyrus is a scholar because of his origin story, but we believe it because of the way he studies his opponents, highlighting their weaknesses and sharing them with his allies. His entire story is centered on the belief that knowledge should be shared and not hoarded for one's own personal gain. For the combat to drive that home is thrilling to see. I could keep going down this road, highlighting each character's combat abilities to reinforce my point, but I think you get it. Octopath Traveler is a long game, especially if you complete all 4 chapters of each character's narrative. And while many of the quests begin on pretty boring notes, many of them blossom into truly engaging territory. Stories involving ethical dilemmas and personal crises for each of the travelers. But on many levels, I think the game's creators knew they needed strong gameplay to get you to those interesting narrative twists. They knew you'd spend the vast majority of your time fighting, so why not tell their story there, in the heat of pitched battles? Octopath Traveler's combat nails that holiest of storytelling mantras: show, don't tell. As I said before, Octopath's 8-plot structure runs the risk of feeling wobbly or disjointed. But its combat has the legs to pull you through, to tell you a story on its own. It defines these characters with verbs rather than adjectives. Looking back on my time with the JRPG, I don't see 8 individual quests, but one unifying narrative, conveyed not just in what the developers are telling us, but what we ourselves are doing. And I think that's something future JRPGs should continue to strive for.